Good evening, and welcome to the 41st Legislative District Virtual Town Hall. Tonight, we will be hearing from State Senator Lisa Wellman and State Representatives Tana Senn and My-Linh Thai. Some of you have submitted questions in advance, and I will read those questions to the lawmakers. You may also submit your question live via the chat box, so please submit your questions now, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Before we begin answering some questions, I'd like to open the floor up to our lawmakers for some brief opening remarks.
Thank you, Megan. Good evening, everybody. I am Tana Senn, your state representative and the senior member of the 41st Legislative Delegation. It's a great honor to serve with Representative Thai and Senator Wellman. I wanted to just give you a quick overview of the session this year, because we were really focused. And we made sure that we were addressing issues around COVID-19, around economic recovery, around racial equity, and around climate change. And between the House and the Senate, we really were focused on making sure that we addressed those issues. And I am proud to say that your 41st Legislative Delegation was quite at the forefront of a number of those issues. Representative Thai was really a leader on police accountability and passing the Working Families Tax Exemption. Senator Wellman was a leader around education and making sure our schools had the funding that they needed and were stable, and passed massive legislation around broadband, which we know is critical for digital equity and doing anything during the pandemic. And I was thrilled to be the sponsor of one of the capital gains tax bills and to pass landmark legislation around childcare. So I'm thrilled again to serve and to welcome you all tonight, and looking forward to the discussion. As you probably might remember, I chair the Children, Youth, and Families Committee. I serve on the Local Government Committee, and I serve on the Budget Committee in the House. Good colleague, Senator Wellman.
Well, it's so nice for me not to be the senior. I'm usually the senior in every room that I go into. So this is really nice to be able to talk to represent and say, he's our senior leader. Thank you so much. It was a really a dense session. It seemed like we were on, 10 hours a day on Zoom calls, but I really do think we got quite a bit done. I do chair early learning and K-12 education. In the Senate, we have both of those together. In the House, it's two separate committees. I also sit on energy, environment, and technology, hence the focus on broadband, but there was a lot of work that we did on the environment, of course, and climate change issues. And this year, I sit on Ways and Means. So I got to see a little bit of the last action of budgeting and what have you. And it's definitely not Schoolhouse Rock. It's a lot more complex as you go on. But we did good things that we'll talk about in education as Representative said. I'll toss it over for an introduction to Senator Thai.
Thank you, Senator Wellman, and hello, everyone. It still feels really good to be the junior of the delegations. However, I can't really say that I'm a newbie, which both a great things, as I felt very prepared coming into the past sessions, and especially it was entirely remote. We didn't know how it turned out, but the way it turned out, as my seatmate has mentioned, historical. We are very pleased. At the same time, historically, beside passing giant legislations, we worked together. Like the entire sessions, there was not the House and the Senate. It was like the House and Senate together. Focus, as Representative Senn has mentioned. This year, I continue to serve as a member of Civil Rights Judiciary. With my passions in housing and the issues of addressing homelessness, I moved into housing, veteran, and oh goodness, the last one.
Services. Human Services.
Human Services, that's right. I keep saying we took that from Representative Senn's committees, and so she remember. And finance, as I champion the working family tax exemptions. Last but really not least, I get to serve on rule committees, and very privileged to be elected to serve as the caucus vice chair in the House Democratic Caucus. Look forward to your questions, and always love these opportunity to engage with you.
Great. Thank you all so much for those opening remarks. Now we're going to begin taking questions. We have quite a few questions submitted ahead of time, and we are taking questions live. So if you're participating, feel free to type your question into the comment section. Our first question comes from Keith. Keith asks, what did you do about climate change?
Well, there were some major bills, as you possibly are alluding to, as far as climate change. And one of the main objectives was to get us on the path to meet the Paris Accord guidelines, and to really get us to the point where we're aligned with what we had set up to do as far as the Accord. We did a massive bill called, it was called the Climate Commitment Act, but we also refer to it as Cap and Invest. And it is a bill that really steadily reduces carbon, puts it on the open market, and really allows us to empower Washington to build really a net zero emissions environment. It was a major challenging bill. It was a big bill. It went down to the very last minute. But it was one of a number of things. There was also the clean fuel standards. There's definite focus on moving us to the electrification of transportation. Transportation's one of the major emitters of carbon. And so what we've seen in companies like Amazon went to an all-electric fleet. We're looking at getting our ferries electrified. We're looking to standardize the electric stations around the state, which is an issue. And so that was another one of the bills. And then other things related to just cleaning up the environment, and working on things like improving recycling and things like that. But they were pretty significant, and I think it's something to be proud of.
Definitely. And one thing that I'll just throw in too is a lot of the environmental and climate change work was also focused on making sure that our underserved communities and those that were facing the most pollution had the part of the Cap and Invest, that we were investing in those communities, and also passed something called the HEAL Act, which was really targeted towards making sure that communities that had the most environmental pollution or worst air and water quality got more attention.
Next question, please.
Great. Thank you for those responses. Our next question comes from Lewis. Lewis asks, renters were the focus of assistance this year, but landlords have been struggling due to a loss of income. How did you help landlords keep their properties and get back the money they lost?
Yes, so thank you for the question, Lewis. As a member on the housing committees, many of these legislations came through our committees, and we had an opportunity not only to debate with other legislators, but listening to public as they share the impact of the outcome of the eviction moratorium during the pandemic. You are right that the focus of assistance for renters, that was the attempt as part of making sure people are sheltered during the pandemic as part of the public health response, for public safety as a whole. When legislation came together, we heard a lot from landlords, and especially those who in the 41st legislative district, they are either retirees who owned a few units as part of their supplemental incomes, or from community like mine, immigrants who started to build their wealth in our 41st district. I also want to take this opportunity to thank them. I want to thank all the landlords who has been a part of the conversation during the entire 18 months of the pandemic in the past, is that they have shown kindness and compassion and understanding and be a partner in this work. These legislations, for many of the important policy went through. One of them is to create the first in the nation that provide the right to counsel, to ensure that low-income tenants have access to court-appointed attorney to help them navigate a complex system. We also making sure that our landlords have now access to many of the rental assistance, and we give local government a lot of flexibility when it's come to supporting housings and ensuring that all of those who involved in the industry have capacity to seek help.
Great. Thank you for that response, Representative Thai. Our next question comes from Charles. Charles asks, ranked choice voting has been proven to be great for democracy. Since the bill didn't pass this year, are there plans to make sure it gets passed next year?
Thanks, Charles, for that question. I love that we're already thinking about and looking to the future. I think we're all still in the, what did we do this year? Yeah, so ranked choice voting was definitely something we had a lot of discussion about and didn't make it quite all the way through. There definitely were some conversations of the history of ranked choice voting in the Tacoma area where the outcomes weren't so ideal in that initial go. And so I think there were some real concerns that were expressed there that I think have to be worked out and kind of explained as to what would be different and how we could ensure that that didn't happen. The other, I think, consideration was because we were dealing with COVID and this economic recovery, that coming up with a whole new system at this time that would really rely on local governments making choices and having that be different across different jurisdictions was just too much of what, and not one of those 4 areas of our focus. And so I think, next year, I imagine it will be something that is discussed again. But again, I think with our main focus on the racial equity, climate change, COVID recovery, and economic recovery, that wasn't one of the things that raised to the top of the list.
Great. Thank you for that response, Representative Senn. This is a reminder that this is a live virtual town hall event with the 41st Legislative District. And if you have a question, you can feel free to submit that in the comments section. We're now going to go to a question from Annette. Annette asks, Senator Wellman, can you talk more about your broadband bill and how it will help our digital infrastructure? What's going to happen with the 2 different House and Senate broadband bills?
Well, this was quite an interesting ride for me in terms of how these bills went forward. There were actually 2 separate ways that we addressed broadband. From the House, there was a decision to completely open it up, unrestricted. Everybody can do what they want from the cities. Large cities already they've got authority to do it. But the second level cities were now available to do that. Counties could get involved, as well as ports and PUDs, public utility districts. So that was a wide open bill. My bill was
Senator Wilf, to offer broadband services.
To offer broadband services, absolutely. Open up broadband, anybody can do it, not restricted. And then my bill was worked with the broadband office, which we established 2 years ago with a bill that I ran. And the broadband office was in our state, about 80 to 85% of people have broadband. Some of you have it, that it's not as great as we want it to be for sure, but about 15% to 20% don't have any. And it was very clear, especially as chair of education, watching kids in cars in parking lots, not having any access, in their homes or even close by. We put out a lot of hotspots, but as far as the bills were concerned, there were two different approaches, and we both felt, I think, that our approaches were valid, and so we each ran our bills, and they both went through. And then the governor went into a room during the signing and came back, and he said that he had signed both bills simultaneously, one with his right hand and one with his left hand, and that he then sent it to the Secretary of State. And the Secretary of State, I'm just telling you this saga because it's quite interesting. This is the inside story. So the Secretary of State said, this office is not a policy office. We are an administrative office. And so we're not going to register the bills as being this one takes precedent. And so as far as I know, the thought was that it was going to go to the courts. Now, does that mean we're not going to do any broadband no, not at all. We have money that went from the federal government is coming in, as well as from state. That money went to the broadband office, went to the Community Economic Revitalization Fund that handles some broadband and has always been able to handle broadband, and some to the Public Works Board to take on projects that communities around the state, as long as we're focused, that money will go to unserved areas. So we're still waiting to see the end of the story. I don't know. I don't have the end of the story for you, but it's been quite interesting. A lot of people had no idea how this would work out, and we still don't know.
Great. Thank you for that response, Senator Wellman. We're now going to go to a live question in the comments from Sean. Sean asks, are we going to get a full accounting of the employment security fraud that occurred last year? It seems that there's been no information forthcoming. We also had a similar question submitted by Arian. There are still issues with ESD and holdups in unemployment benefits. How are you holding ESD accountable?
So I'll just say that, dealing with ESD was incredibly frustrating. Clearly, as legislators, it was frustrating, which is much, more irrelevant than it was frustrating for our constituents. And I think hearing from you and people around the state who were not getting their benefits that they deserved was heartbreaking and frustrating, and definitely a low light of the legislative session, but obviously throughout the whole year of 2020, when we were working with ESD to help resolve the different issues that were coming up. So just that your frustration was definitely heard, was recognized. I will give a little bit of the the background that ESD had never dealt with, and no agency had ever dealt with, the flood of claims that came in all at once, and so they didn't have the physical capacity of staff or the technology, and so that was part of some of the initial problems with the system, and similarly wanting to get the dollars out as fast as possible, and so they did relax some of the double checking to make sure that people weren't losing their homes or were able to eat, and that did result in the now obviously very publicized fraud that has been being resolved and has been clawing back. And there was just an arrest of somebody who had really been part of that ring. But it's definitely been an ongoing issue that has not been resolved in how they address everything. It's not perfect, and we continue to push and will continue to.
There was a bill. We did pass a bill that, from the Senate to strengthen oversight and accountability within the unemployment department. And I've been in touch with our WATEC, we're calling, and the workers, so that workers can access the benefits. And we did, as Rep. Senn said, we did recover a good deal of the money. There still was several $100 million that were not recovered, and they're still working on that.
Great. Thank you for those responses. Our next question is on police accountability. Casey says, I'm glad our state did so much for police accountability this year, but at the same time, it's just a start. Why did it take so long to make this much progress, and what are your next steps?
I can take that questions. Why did it take so long? I have the same questions as you. You know, in our state, what we had was Initiative 940. And at the time when Initiative 940 passed, get into the book, the commitment from the legislators was to continue working on it. And anytime we are talking about changing systems, turning the status quo, making it more progressive, moving it to the 21st century, really recognizing the struggle that that our people within the state have repeatedly sharing with us. I mean, the police brutality is not new. Police covering for each other is not new. Many of the policies governing activities and the use of force, none of these are not news. It took you, it took us, black, white, brown. It took us, young, old. It took us, all different socioeconomic. It took us down to the street during the pandemic, willing to risk our safety to stand with those who have been experiencing these injustices for this to happen. And so, once again, I'm grateful for us. We are the reason for the change. What we're looking forward is making sure that the legislation and the policy passed will be implemented with fidelity. We want to make sure that the trainings available, the data collected is accurate. And we continue to engage in dialogues with families who have lost loved one due to a lot of these incidents of police abuse as far as use of force. And I wanted to also say that we were deeply touched by family members who so courageous and they display so much love, the love for many others, because none of these will bring back their loved one. They came to public testimony. They share their painful stories repeatedly, and that is in public. It did not, many of us did not see that these family members meet with every single legislators, whoever who willing to listen to them, and repeatedly sharing their stories, repeatedly relive the pain that they have experienced. And for that, we, all of us, owe them such a tremendous gratitude. And they commit to continue working with the state legislators, commit working with law enforcement across the spectrum, local and state, to ensure that we want to rebuild the trust between those who took an oath to serve and provide and support public safety for all, and those of us who are community members. So I too look forward to that.
One of the things I want to bring out is that there were an incredible group of senators and representatives that were working all through the spring and summer and fall to bring together. These bills don't just happen overnight. They're very complex and very, very carefully thought through. I also want to point out I was gratified. I don't know how to express the words, because it was really so challenging for so many people and heartbreaking for others. Hearing today about Attorney General Ferguson's finally calling the murder of Manny Ellis in Tacoma murder, and three law enforcement officers have been arrested and are being charged or have been charged. And that's a first. And that's from a bill that is happened several years ago. So that's not just something that just happened. That was in place and allowed Ferguson to move forward on that. So there will be justice, and it's the kind of thing that we're beginning to see across the country, and we need to see, and people need to know that there will be accountability.
Great. Thank you so much. This is a reminder that if you're watching, this is a live virtual town hall with the 41st Legislative District, and you can submit questions in the comment section. Next, we're going to go to a question from Carly. Carly says, I think everyone's mental health has taken a nosedive since 2020. The mental health hotline bill is a great start, but we need more to help people before they're in crisis. What else have you been working on to help people, especially kids and seniors?
Can I just open by saying a lot of people don't know about the hotline, the 988 bill, and the 988 program that the federal government has started, and that we have stepped up to with legislation, so that we will meet the federal government with something in place when they're ready to roll out the 588 program. And it's a new way of looking at things. This is it is not 911. When you do, you have 911, you're having an emergency of any kind, and some resources are sent out. In this particular case, it's all about having people who actually are mental health providers on the line, well-trained people with solid backgrounds, who actually, because when you're in crisis, you don't want to say, one moment, I'll connect you to somebody else who may be able to help you. That's the last thing in the world that you want. And so this is a hotline with people well-trained. There was a lot of focus in education, of course. We do understand that for children, this has been, and I talk about it in terms of the bell-shaped curve, in terms of the feedback that I've gotten. And I've been on every single week with people across the state. What is happening in your community? What is happening, with children? So what I can tell you is in this bell-shaped curve, there were kids who did better because they were doing distance learning. And for some of them, it really worked. And on the other end of the spectrum were kids that, either they're, the frustration of trying to deal with technology, which they'd never done before, as a way of, getting what they needed, was very challenging. And the fact that they could not often see the teacher or have that interaction or be with their friends at a time when, that social connection is really, really important, was very depressing for many of the kids. It was really hard on the teachers too. I've had many people that I've employed in the course of my career. And when you can't do your good work, and teachers are there for those are their kids. And when they can't see their kids, when they're having trouble connecting with their kids, it takes a toll. It gets them very, upset. And so we understand that one of the things we're looking at in education is making sure that the counselors that are there will focus on really counseling and being there for the kids. Additionally, we put additional money in for school nurses and psychologists and for counselors. The CARES Act, the money that we got, 3 waves of money, will provide a lot of resources for our children. And I will also say that point to our community-based organizations. Thank you so much to the Boys and Girls Clubs, to the Ys, to all the different names of the clubs that are out there, that they have been just champions in terms of being there for families and for children during the course of this of this pandemic. But I do tell you that we're very much aware that it's not going to be one and done when we're all vaccinated. Please God, we're back. The schools are open full time. People are going back to school. It's not like, oh, well, okay, we're all good now. I think that there's going to be recovery. We've got to stabilize. We've got to recover. We've got to let kids settle back in, get their feet under them, feel, first of all, it's more social, emotional than it is academic. We can ramp up the academics, but they really need to just get back into the groove. And we're hoping to provide a lot of support for that.
Yes, so I really, it's like you can see all three of us have a lot to say about this question. Because this pandemic really impacted us all. And yes, the question is very specific to children and our elders. But I do believe that it impacts all of us because we are all connected. We have parents and elders to care for and worry for, and we all have children who we care for and worry for. I just want to add to what Senator Wellman have shared is that I and Representative Lisa Calland from the 5th Legislative District. Representative Calland is the chair, and I am the chair for the big umbrella that look into the entire spectrum from birth till the last day of life, I guess, from cradle to grave, to ensure that the mental health and behavioral health are being addressed, and we brought different organizations, state agencies, and individuals who representing east, west, north, south of the state to be part of the conversations. And in that space, we have, in fact, in 2019, was it 2019 or 2020, Tana? I can't remember. The legislature funded specifically the work group for K-12. And that is a task force that I get to co-chair, specifically looking at K-12. How do we build in system to support our students when it's come to behavior and mental health? And then there's other subset, birth to 5 years old, and then and the entire continuum. And so thank you for the questions. That work we have identified as something we need to ramp up and build up. And the pandemics really rush us to make sure that we like laser focus as we together coming out of the pandemic to ensure that there is a vibrant workforce developed and well-trained, really in alignment with what Senator Wellman has shared. And I want to add one more thing, is that 988 is not only about the mental health hotline, it is part of transforming our public safety. That there's certain crisis require different professional who on the lines and help our people. Not everything can be handled by law enforcement officers.
Great, thank you for those responses. The next question comes from the comment section from Donald. Donald asks, can you tell us about capital gains and compromises necessary to get it to pass? And we also had a submitted question from Lauren who asks, can you clarify the exemptions on the capital gains tax?
I just wish that I was paying it. Wouldn't that be? I'm not taking $250,000 a year from my retirement funds are exempt, but from any funds that I've got in.
All right, there you go. So thank you, Don, for the question, and to Lauren. So the capital gains tax, excise tax, as you may know, has been introduced many times in the legislature, and we've passed it out of the House before, but we've never passed it out of the Senate. And so one of the goals this year was to really let the Senate move it first, and so that we could then ensure that it was gonna move. And so in the end, some of the compromises was originally a capital gains excise tax was for the sale of real estate and or stocks and bonds and other high valued assets like, really expensive art and other things like that. Coming out of the Senate, it just is focused on the sale of stocks and bonds and art and other things. So again, not the real estate. So the legislation says that you will pay a 7% excise tax on the sale of stocks or bonds that exceed $250,000 in profit a year. And so that means that about a 0.09% of the people in Washington state might pay this capital gains tax. And, it exempts timber and fish products and agricultural land. Retirement accounts are completely exempt. And as I said, all real estate is exempt. So it really is focused on very ultra wealthy individuals in our state, and to pay the capital gains excise tax that will go to fund, the most important part, I think, is to help fund early learning, childcare, and education. And so that really is, because that is the best investment we can make. So taking dollars from investments, from profit from investments, and having that go to the best investment we can make in our children and our future, and our future workforce and our current workforce, frankly, is critical. So it really was exciting. There was so much back and forth, but we got it across the finish line.
But two things, I think one is a clarification, because for some people, they don't understand that, your stocks and bonds or whatever those assets may be traded all during the year, and you may make money. Well, you may make money, but until you actually get that handed to you in a check or in your bank account, just because it's happening in a fund that you have with a broker, doesn't mean that you're paying taxes on it. You actually have to take it as part of the money that you receive. You sell that and you take the money from that. And the 41st had a little bit of an exciting story as far as that's concerned. Can we tell that story, Tana? I think that's our own little story, because the last day of session, the tree went down on Mercer Island. I lost my internet and I lost my electricity, and it's like we're doing the last bills, and I called Representative Senn. I said, "Do you have electricity? Can I come over to your house?" And she said, "Of course, come right over." So she set me up in the kitchen, and once again, everything was fine until the capital gains tax bill, when I again lost the internet for a minute or two, so that my vote didn't register, and so they had to call me. And so, as it turned out, in Representative Senn's kitchen, we passed the final vote because it was a tied vote, but we broke the tie in Representative Senn's kitchen.
With your vote, yes, it was quite dramatic.
Thank you for sharing that story.
And actually, just really quickly, sorry, Megan, to interrupt. I do just want to really emphasize about, why we're all giddy about the capital gains tax as well, is because really that, combined with Representative Thai's working family excise tax, is really focused on helping begin to change our upside down tax code. And so Washington State has really the most regressive tax structure, in that, those on the lowest end of the income spectrum are paying the highest percentage of their taxes, and those on the wealthiest end are paying the least percentage, even though they have the most, they can afford it the most. And so together with the working families tax credit, which will give money back into people's pockets, and then the capital gains tax, which will have people pay more in who are on the wealthier side with the sale of stocks or bonds. And we're really helping make sure that we're making our tax code more fair. And so that's so critical. And what we saw really with the pandemic is that just like the top 5 or 6 billionaires in Washington state alone gained $150 billion just in Washington state, just during the pandemic, gained $150 billion, which is like 3 times our entire state budget. But those who are at the lowest end of the income spectrum were struggling and worried about eating and keeping a roof over their head. And so we have to balance this system. And so that's why, we really feel like we are representing key values of equity, fairness, of funding the things that we need that will be game changers for our community. So that's really the underpinning of kind of the enthusiasm tonight too of talking about these bills.
Right, and in the spirit of sharing story really quickly, I was in a grocery store. I was looking at some flour to liven up my working station during remote session. I overheard 2 individuals talking to each other. One would say to the others that, "Oh, have you heard they passed the working families tax credit thing? So finally, some of the hardworking people can get some cash back into their pocket." And I was so happy. I was about to turn around and say, "Guess what? I'm your representative, and I would, And then and just a split second right after that, the same individual say, "And for one moment, we thought they care about us. But no, they have to pass the capital gain tax, and retiree like me will have to keep paying into these tax of like these people who keep wanting to take our money. They give us $1, and they take like $10 from us." And I was like, "No, that is so wrong." So I want to reinstate it that no retirees will ever have to pay this capital gain tax, and only on the profit of the sale of bond and stocks. So if that is not clear enough,
right, not at the retirement accounts, exactly.
Asking the questions, and we will make sure we repeat the answer.
Great, thank you all. This is just a reminder that you're watching a live virtual town hall with the 41st Legislative District. Feel free to submit your questions in the comments below. We're now going to go to a live question from Steve. Steve asks, how has the legislature supported and encouraged schools and teachers to get students back in the classroom this fall?
Well, how we're encouraging it. I'm not sure how we're encouraging it. We're proceeding as though hopefully we will get all of our residents vaccinated. And we're really, one of the things that has been so good about the state of Washington, I know it's been challenging, but given the rates that we've had, we have been amongst the lowest, even though we were the hot spot to start with. Because we had immediate action, as you know, we have been one of the lowest in terms of our rate of infection and death, which I think this has been, over 600,000 people have died so far. And we're hearing things from other countries. In any event, the school districts have had to submit their plans for what is happening now, which is mostly a hybrid system where some kids can come back. They're still working on whether it's 6 feet or 3 feet or a little bit less. We're still looking at HVAC systems that allow air movement, which is so important. We're still looking at whether, I was just on a call today, whether people within the school environment have to be masked still. Whether you're there for a meeting with the board, the board of directors or with staff. So there's still various kinds of things. But the intent is to get the schools open. And a lot of it will depend on vaccination. If I can take 1 minute, I want to say something that I think I just don't hear anybody talking about. I spent 8 hours. It was quite a session during the summer, listening to the insurance companies and the lawyers talk about the exposure of our schools that they would face as far as the public is concerned, regarding whether teachers got COVID while they came to school, or because they were exposed in school and went home and exposed somebody else who died, what the results would be. It was really dramatic. And I think there were a lot of school board directors who had this training and were exposed to this training, because that's part of their job, to understand when they do things that put the school district at risk. And it was really important to make sure that the schools were well covered, whether they liked it or not, were doing things that were required to be done in order to keep people safe. And so hopefully getting back to school, there's a plan, as schools have got to submit their plans for recovery programs for how they're coming back to school in the fall. And we're hoping that it will be a very seamless transition. As you may know or may not know, schools can actually choose whatever start dates and end dates. We pay for 180 days of school, but you can start in the beginning of October, you can start at the end of September, you can phase in or out as you want. And so that's one of the things that is up to the school district to decide how they want to do it. I'm not sure that answered the question. Anybody else have anything else encouraging them to get back to school? Students want to get back. Although I will say we did a survey. We did a couple of surveys. And when we asked earlier this winter, would you send your kids back to school if they opened? We never got more than 60%. And that was high. Usually it was between 50 and 60% of parents who said that they wanted to send their children back to school. So this was not everybody who wanted their kids back to school. We also heard from kids, and this was touching and really sad, that they were afraid to go to school because what if they were exposed to something and they brought it home and they hurt grandma or something, like that. They felt very engaged in being part of the problem potentially. And so they were nervous about coming back as well, some of them. So.
And I will actually just jump in and take it in a slightly different direction, if you will. One of the things that the legislature did this year was pass really historic legislation around childcare. And I mention this because with the schools closed, families were relying on childcare providers and the Boys and Girls Club after school programs that went full day to ensure that kids were safe, that they had somewhere to go, and to make sure that parents could go to work. But childcare providers mostly don't have health care. They're extremely low paid. And so they were really struggling, and they certainly aren't, technical tech experts. And yet, as kids were going and doing school hybrid, they might be at a childcare who would have, 6 different grades and potentially across 4 different school districts, and with all these different systems. And did they have broadband? There was this huge intersection. And so working really closely with the business community, who really understood that we had to have childcare back in place if we were going to have any economic recovery. Hospitals couldn't have nurses and doctors there. If you are on any Zoom call, you know how many Zoom bombs there were with kids in the background. On the mental health question, right, it's really hard to have that intense therapy session when the provider or the patient is with their kids in the background. So the investments in childcare that we made this legislative session, and frankly, money coming from the federal government as well along the way, have been critical to make sure that we sustain childcare, that we expand it, we pay providers more. We are increasing eligibility for parents so that more and more of those on the lower end of the income spectrum and on up into the middle class can have some assistance with childcare. We really focused on making sure that we have mental health consultation for childcare so kids don't get kicked out more. This will help the small businesses of childcare. This will help our big businesses so employees can come back, and making sure that working parents can actually go to work and have an economic recovery. So childcare was just fundamental. I'm sure if you've read any news, you'll hear about the importance of childcare. So that was just a huge tool as schools were closed, and even now just ongoing, that I think has been, was a really critical move as well. So I'm excited to have led that effort and to see how much that we've done.
And it's really important. And one of the things that I think people should be aware of is that was an industry that was very hard hit. We had half of our childcare centers closed for financial reasons. They had to close their doors initially, et cetera. And so the recovery of that industry is something that Representative Senn and others have put a great deal of focus on to make sure that we can get them back up and running.
And I just add just one more thing to the question itself, because it's very specific, and I kind of zoom into the word supported for teachers and students as they're coming back in the fall. And we constantly engaging with school district and recognizing that of 295 school districts, we have big, small, rural, urban. They are not the one size fit all. And so at the state level, OSBI, number one, is ready to support school districts with the local school board directors who is responding to the local needs. If the school district still need to provide the hybrid learning conditions, as Senator Wellman articulated, that some of our students actually found remote learning was a good thing for them, that they learn so much more. Should we provide that for those students who have found that avenue, that non-traditional learning? We also working with our Congress delegations, making sure that our kids will have food. I mean, one of the legislations that we passed is that there's no longer a co-payment for lunch. It's we all know that when our kids go hungry, there's no way, they can focus and being able to learn. And so, and of course, making sure that those who could get the vaccine, that there's no other medical conditions that prevent them from getting the vaccine, would receive vaccines in the least restrictive means. I know that in the Bellevue School District, Sammamish High School have been hosting at least two being the site of vaccination for not only educators, students, but their families as well. And so if you know, or if you think of any other ways or means that the state can support our schools, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, because really we only know so much. And you being parents, grandparents, students, and educators yourself, you're on the ground, you know what's needed, and your voice and your help is definitely welcomed. And all three of us look forward to your suggestions.
Great.
So we're coming up on the end, and what kind of last ideas? One of the things I want to share is a meeting that I had just today, several hours, on mastery-based education, because one of the things that we're very focused on is making sure that again, education, but making sure that our kids are ready for 21st century economy and that they have what they need. And one of the things, again, because of the pandemic, is that we've got devices in the hands of almost every child now, and that they are, I know sometimes it's been challenging for parents, but our kids are going to have access to the world. Education is changing. And now with devices, with the focus on broadband, and we put a great deal of money into getting broadband out everywhere, we're going to really be able to make some significant advances in our education system as we change it to one that recognizes that digital technology is where it's at, regardless of your farming or your whatever industry that you're in. And so that's going to be a focus. And one of the things that we're coming out of the pandemic ahead of ahead because of what we've had to do to respond. I think we should also think of, the positive things. It's not, nobody wants to go back to normal. We want to go back to better, right?
That's right. And then Megan, I think you had one last question for us.
I do, yes. The last question is, what is something else that you haven't talked about this evening that we should know about?
Well, I can tell you right off the top of my head, what I want to mention is that we banned the open carry of guns at the state capitol and at protests. And that is huge. I am so excited. As you all have seen, January 6th riot at the national capitol, at other state capitals across the country, has just been absolutely devastating and terrifying for constituents to visit us, for gun violence survivors to come and testify, just for employees to go to work. Having no open carry of weapons at the state capitol is a game changer. And I think will keep our communities much safer to also not have weapons displayed and intimidating at protests. So we need to use our words and debate to make change, not violence and intimidation.
I'm also going to mention that we're the first state in the country to bring about 40-hour work week for agricultural workers. And, it's interesting because here we are, 3 women from the 41st, suburban Washington. But when you're a legislator, your job is the state. Your job is things that impact people everywhere, and hopefully making a positive difference in their lives. And that's something, that I was focused on because of the work that I did in rural Washington. And it's just one of those things that makes me very happy to know that people who are out there working for us, putting food on our table daily, bringing that. And we are an agricultural state with a strong export in agriculture, and those workers are going to have the right to a 40-hour week.
And I'm going to take us a little further out. We are once again the first state in the nation to ensure that human rights is being protected. And even though the human rights being protected in a very narrow part where we make sure that those who have marriage and have children with people from different countries, and then they ended up in a divorce, and they're in the middle of the battle for child custody. But the countries that would not recognize human rights, whether it's gender identities, whether it's religious belief, whether it's, multiple list of what we values as human right. And if mom and the child landed in those countries for the court hearing, they could be arrested and potentially put to death. And so we change that part of the law in Washington state, which is the first in the nation to protect the parents of the child, especially in the country that have laws that potentially lead to their death. So we have so much to celebrate, and Washington has been the leaders in so many areas and issues.
So I think, as you've seen, there's such a variety of legislation that we did, that's super micro, that's super macro. 93% of the bills that we passed in the legislative session were bipartisan. Everything from making sure that those who are leaving incarceration have the right to vote, to making sure those at the lower end of the spectrum have access to no-cost diapers. We made just dramatic changes, and helping business, making sure that the unemployment insurance does not put a business out of business by dramatically buying down those unemployment insurance premiums and expenses. And so we really did some amazing work this legislative session. So I appreciate that you guys have joined us tonight. It's an honor to work with my colleagues. And please, we're out of session, but we are continuing to respond to constituent requests and issues. So bring it on.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
So that's all the time we have this evening. Thank you so much for attending and for submitting questions for your lawmakers. If we did not get to your question, you can directly contact Senator Wellman, Representative Senn, and Rep. Thai's offices with your comments. Their contact information will appear on the screen right after this. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great evening.